Hey, how's it going, guys? Here's some of the drawings that I've done recently for the soccer manga that I've been working on. And in all of these drawings, I've used a simplified anatomy to rough out the pose. And in this video, I'm going to show you the method that I use to do that, and also how to draw their proportions. Cool, so for this video, we're going to draw a 7-head tall guy. And I've just broken up the page into horizontal lines that are the height of his head. So in the first section, I'm just roughing in the head for the character. I'm not going to really go into too much detail about how to draw the head, but for a 7-head tall guy, I'll usually put the eyes right on the center line, that horizontal line. So here I'm going to draw his neck just into the next section. And one thing that we want to do for these proportion videos is to establish the midway point of the height. So halfway between the top of his head and the bottom of his feet, you'll find a center line, and this is going to be the bottom of his hips. And this is going to be really helpful as we do proportions, and you'll see that in a bit. So now we're going to draw the torso, and from the bottom of the neck, I'm just going to slope these two lines towards his shoulders. And I keep it fairly wide for this character who's definitely older. And watch this next shape. It's going to be sort of a rounded trapezoid. This is going to be his rib cage. And I want you guys to start thinking about this as a solid shape. So I'm just doing a little crosshatch and shading it in so you think of it as a solid mass. And right under that, you can see that midway line that we drew earlier. That's the bottom of the hips. And here we're going to draw in, I like to call a melted marshmallow. And just like the ribs, this is a solid mass. And this is his hips. So I'm just going to shade this in. And all we have to do to finish up the torso is connect these two masses with just two waistlines. And now I'm just using my blue pencil. I'm going to rough in his legs. One leg is going to be straight. The other is going to be slightly tilted to make it more interesting. And now I'm just going to rough in his feet. And now to find his knees, all we have to do is draw in little marks for his ankles. And halfway between the bottom of his hips and the ankles is the knees. And some people like to use circles for the joints, and I think that's cool. If you find that helpful, you can do that. I often do that when I'm drawing my characters. So we're going to do the leg, and starting at the outside of the hips, you can start drawing his thigh. And the top of his thigh is going to be slightly wider than the area around his knees. So try to keep that in mind. And for his knees, I'm just going to mark these two little dots to show his knees. And then we can bring down some lines for his lower leg. Remember to give a slight curve for his calf muscle on the inside there. And we'll finish his standing pose off with just some simple shapes for his feet. All right, so next there's some cool proportions or measurements for his arms. So here I'm bringing the line out just a little bit for his shoulder, and we're going to draw the top of his arm and stop right at the bottom of the rib cage. So at the bottom of the ribs, you'll find his elbow. And if we draw his forearm down, we're going to stop at the bottom of his hips, and that's where you're going to find his wrist. And rough in just some shapes for his hands. And now let's do the same thing on the other side, so we can see it again. So come out a little bit for his shoulder, and we'll bring down his arm down to the bottom of his ribs, where we're going to find his elbow. And then for his forearm, we're going to bring it down all the way to the bottom of the hips, and that's where you'll find the wrist. So all we do is finish off his hand, and here we have our 7-head tall guy. Good for, high school senior. He could be dating the 6-head tall girl that we did in the other video. And so if you're wondering how are we going to draw a younger character, all we have to do is lower his height in heads. So the next character I'm going to draw is a character who is 6 heads tall. And for his eye line, I lower his eyes just a little bit from the guy on the left. And just like before, I'm going to find the midway point of his height. That's going to be the bottom of his hips. Draw in his neck. 2 lines sloping down. Oh, don't forget his neck. And now we're going to draw that rounded trapezoid for his ribs. Shade that in so we can remember that it's a solid mass. And that line we drew before is the bottom of his hips. So we're going to draw that melting marshmallow. Fill that in. Connect the 2 sides, and we have his torso. So once again, I'm going to draw his legs, just using this as guidelines. It doesn't have to be perfect. Find the feet, and midway between the ankles and the bottom of the hips is the knees. And here I'm going to go through his legs again. Remember to keep the top part of his thighs slightly wider than the area around his knees. Calf muscles on the inside. And we'll finish that off with some trapezoids again for his feet. So even though he's shorter, the proportions for his arms are still the same. See how we have the elbow and the bottom of the ribs matching up? And we'll draw his forearm down to his wrist, which lines up exactly to the bottom of his hips. So just like the taller character. Same thing for the other arm, elbow and wrist. And for my next character, I'm going to lower the height, but I'm going to show you what to do when the height is in between the head height. So next we're going to do 5.5 heads, which is right there. And you want to make sure you draw in the other line, which is going to be his chin. So that's his head. And just like the first 2 characters, we're going to find his midway point so we know where the bottom of his hips are. Just counting 2.75 is the halfway point. And we'll just put in his head. And as the character gets younger, I'll draw the eyes bigger. Maybe his hair gets more messy. And you definitely want to not make his shoulders as wide as the older guy. So as he gets younger and shorter, start bringing in his shoulders to make it more narrow. And so we're drawing in that trapezoid, using that line, midway line, to put in his hips. Shade both of them in. Put in the waist. And the waist for the guy, I tend to draw vertical, whereas if you remember from the last set of videos we did on the girl proportions, the waist we sort of angled them in to give the girls that hourglass shape. But for the guys, you can just use a vertical line to connect the ribs and the hips. And even with this character who's shorter than the other 2, the proportions are still the same. Elbow matches up with bottom of the ribs. Wrist matches up with bottom of the hips. And the same for the other side. So this proportions, these principles will work, I've seen from 7 all the way down to even 4 tall character. Maybe I'd pull the hips a little lower, but it pretty much works. And now where things will start to deviate from those principles is when you get to this character, which is a 4-headed, not 4-headed character, a 4-head tall character. And you see this section, there's no way his torso is going to fit in there. So what I'm going to do is draw his hip line half a head lower. And from there we can do the same thing, draw in his trapezoid for his ribs. And then now we're going to use our new hip line to draw in his hips. And put in his legs. This drawing looks a bit wonky, but I think you guys get the idea. And the arms for sure, the proportions are still the same. You can still match it up, just like how we've been doing it before. And so here we have our guy, different heights, different ages. On the left, we have 7 heads. Remember to keep his shoulders pretty wide. And as he gets younger, next we have the 6 head tall character, followed by 5.5. For the 5.5, remember all you have to do is find the halfway point, and then you can fill in the anatomy for his torso. 4 heads is the same, 5 heads is the same, and for 4 heads, remember to drop that hips just a little bit. So these are the proportions that I use when I'm roughing out my character that you saw earlier. And if you want to see how I use these the simplified anatomy to set up poses, check out this guest video I did for Cartoon Block recently, where I take these proportions and this simplified style and I use it to start off this fighting pose. Also, if you want to learn how to draw proportions for girls and in different views, check out these 2 videos that I did recently. Alright guys, that's about all I have for this week. If you liked the video, be sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time.